I didn't think one dinner conversation could fracture my family forever. But 3 weeks ago, my sister decided my husband wasn't welcome at her engagement party, and everything I thought I knew about loyalty, family, and silence collapsed in slow motion. At first, it didn't look dramatic. No screaming, no slammed doors, just a calm phone call in the middle of my workday. Maya has decided George shouldn't come. That was it. No apology, no discussion, just a decision, delivered like a minor scheduling update. I remember staring at my computer screen while she spoke, watching numbers blur together, my chest tightening in a way I didn't fully understand yet. She said it was better if I came alone, less awkward, easier for everyone. Everyone, except my husband. George didn't argue when I told him. That hurt more than if he had. He just nodded, like this was something he'd already prepared himself for, like being quietly excluded from my family was something he'd learned to accept. That was the first crack. The second came when I realized my sister wasn't telling me the truth. She said George didn't understand family. She said he was being negative. She said this was her decision. But none of that was real. The truth didn't come out until after the party I refused to attend, after the apologies, after the tears, after I thought maybe we could repair things. The real reason? Her fiancé thought my husband was too boring, too quiet, too calm, not fun enough to fit the vibe. And my sister, my own sister, chose to protect his comfort by sacrificing my husband's dignity, then lied to my face about it. That lie split something open in me. Because once you realize someone is willing to erase your partner to keep the peace, you start questioning every smile, every family dinner, every moment you thought meant belonging. I'm 29. I've been married for 2 years. And suddenly, I had to decide whether standing by my husband meant losing my sister forever. And maybe realizing I already had. I'm 29, and if you met me in passing, at a grocery store, in a quiet corner of a coffee shop, in the back row of a work training, you'd probably assume I'm the kind of woman who doesn't end up in family blow-ups. I'm not loud. I don't crave attention. I don't post dramatic captions or turn every disagreement into a war. I like routines, I like plans, I like calm. And I used to think my family understood that about me. Maya, my younger sister, is the opposite. She's 26, and she moves through the world like it's made for her to decorate. She's social in a way that looks effortless, the kind of person who can walk into a room of strangers and leave with inside jokes, phone numbers, and dinner plans. She laughs with her whole face. She talks with her hands. She has always been the one people notice first. Growing up, that difference didn't hurt us. If anything, it balanced us. We were close, really close, despite the age gap. When we were kids, she used to climb into my bed when thunderstorms hit, smelling like shampoo and warm blankets, whispering, "Don't let it be loud." I'd tuck her under my arm and promise I wouldn't. Then she left. She moved to Chicago for college while I was still in high school, and for a few years, our closeness became seasonal. Holidays, quick visits, rushed conversations between her new life and my old one. But when she moved back home 2 years ago, it was like we'd hit resume. We went to brunch. We shopped together. We sent each other screenshots of silly memes and voice notes about our days. She'd call me when she was bored, and I'd always pick up, because that's what sisters do, right? By then, I was already married. George and I had been together 5 years and married for 2. We met at work, same company, different departments, when he transferred from the Seattle branch. He was quiet the first week, the way some people are when they're new. Not cold, not awkward, just observant. He listened more than he spoke. He was the kind of man who actually looked at you when you talked, like he was filing your words somewhere safe. I liked that immediately. Our connection didn't start as fireworks. It started as small things. Him saving me a seat in meetings, leaving a sticky note on my desk, "Don't forget lunch." Him noticing I always drank water only when someone reminded me. Him walking with me to my car on nights we stayed late. One day I joked about how accounting people are basically invisible until something goes wrong. He smiled, barely, and said, "Then we're the ones holding everything up." That was George in a sentence. Steady, undramatic, reliable. Maya called us boring the moment she met him. "Oh my God," she'd tease, leaning on my shoulder like we were still teenagers. "You two are accountants? You're literally a matched set, like salt and pepper, like beige and slightly darker beige." George never snapped back. He never tried to compete for her approval. He'd just smile politely, like he understood that Maya's teasing was her way of claiming closeness, even when it crossed lines. And I'll admit, I laughed along sometimes. I told myself it was harmless. because I didn't want to admit what the teasing sometimes felt like, a test George didn't even know he was taking. The thing is, George had always been patient with my family, more patient than I deserve sometimes. My family can be loud, opinionated, the kind of people who think love means commentary. A cousin would ask why we didn't have kids yet, like it was casual conversation. An uncle would make jokes about George being skinny. Someone would always push a drink toward him and say, "Loosen up." George would deflect gracefully every time. He'd laugh softly, redirect the topic, and never once embarrass me. I thought that meant he was fine. But there's a difference between being fine and being used to swallowing discomfort. George lost his parents in a car accident when he was in college. He doesn't have siblings, no big extended family that floods a room, no cousins who show up uninvited, no childhood friends who still come to Thanksgiving. It's just him, which meant when he married me, my family became his only real family by default. And Maya knew that. That's what made what happened later feel like someone kicking the one chair a person has been standing on. But before that, there was Robbie. Maya got engaged to Robbie last month. He's 28. They'd been together 3 years. If George is steady water, Robbie is carbonated soda. Always fizzing, always talking, always filling silence with something, anything. He works in sales and has this overly friendly personality that can feel charming in small doses and exhausting in large ones. He calls people buddy. He laughs too loudly. He's the type to clap someone on the back like it's his job. Maya loves that energy. She loves being seen, loved, celebrated. And to be fair, Robbie wasn't a villain in the beginning. He was just a lot. Sometimes he felt like a man performing the role of fun fiancé more than living it. But Maya and Robbie fit, in the way puzzle pieces fit when both have sharp edges. When Maya announced the engagement, she was glowing. I was genuinely happy for her. She threw her arms around me and squealed, "You're going to help me plan everything." I said, "Of course," because that's what sisters do. I didn't know that within weeks I'd be sitting on my couch watching my husband quietly make plans to leave town, 3 hours away to visit his friend Marcus, just so he wouldn't have to sit in our house on the night my sister celebrated family without him. I didn't know that a single word, boring, would turn into a knife, not because it was cruel, but because it revealed something deeper, that some people don't exclude you because you did something wrong. They exclude you because you don't entertain them. And if the people you call family let that happen, what does that make you? Looking back now, I can see the tension creeping in long before anyone said the quiet part out loud. At the time, it felt small, disconnected, like harmless moments I brushed aside because I didn't want to believe they meant anything more. It started the night Maya invited us over for dinner to celebrate properly. She texted me earlier that day with 3 exclamation points and a photo of a grocery cart overflowing with wine and ingredients I couldn't pronounce. I'm going all out. Candles, real tablecloth, fancy. That should have been my first clue that this night mattered to her more than she was admitting. When we arrived, her apartment smelled like garlic and something sweet baking in the oven. She dimmed the lights and placed candles along the table like this was a proposal dinner instead of a casual family meal. Robbie was already there, pacing slightly, drink in hand, energy buzzing like he was hosting a live event. "You made it," he said, pulling us into separate hugs before we even took our coats off. "This is the pre-party before the party." George smiled politely and handed Maya the bottle of wine we brought. "Congratulations again." Maya beamed. She looked genuinely happy, nervous, excited, alive. Dinner started well enough. She pulled out her phone and showed us photos of potential venues, industrial lofts, rooftop spaces, modern halls with string lights and open bars. She swiped eagerly, waiting for reactions. George and I both said variations of, "That's nice," and "That one looks great." Apparently that wasn't enough. Maya's smile tightened just a fraction, like she'd expected more gasps, more enthusiasm, more performance. Then came the guest list. She rattled off names quickly: college friends, Robbie's coworkers, family friends, cousins, relatives. Robbie chimed in constantly, adding people, revising, narrating the list like a production plan. At one point, Robbie casually suggested inviting his ex-girlfriend from college. "They're still friends," he said, shrugging. "She lives nearby." Maya shut it down immediately. "No, absolutely not. That's weird." Robbie didn't argue, but I noticed his mouth flattened slightly. The moment passed, but something about it stuck with me. How quickly Maya asserted herself when it was her discomfort. Then Maya mentioned inviting our cousin Derek. My stomach tightened. Derek is the kind of relative everyone braces for at gatherings. Loud, drunk by the second hour, always one comment away from crossing a line. Last Christmas, he'd made a remark about Maya's weight, something he'd laughed off as a joke, but it haunted her for weeks. George shifted in his chair. He didn't interrupt. He waited until there was a natural pause before saying carefully, "Maybe Derek isn't the best idea. He's caused problems before, especially with you." The room changed. Maya's eyes snapped to him. "He's family," she said sharply. "You can't just not invite family because they're rude sometimes." George nodded immediately. "You're right. It's your party." But Maya wasn't done. "You wouldn't understand," she added. "Your family is different." The words landed like broken glass. George's parents died in a car accident when he was in college. Maya has always known that. The table went quiet. Robbie looked between them, suddenly very interested in his drink. George's face closed in on itself. Not anger, not tears, just that subtle withdrawal of someone who's been reminded he doesn't belong somewhere. "I get it," he said softly. "It's your call." The conversation moved on, but the night never recovered. George barely spoke after that. He didn't argue. He didn't sulk. He just disappeared into himself. We left early. In the car, he stared out the window while the city lights streaked past. I asked if he was okay. He said, "I'm fine." But he wasn't. The next day, Maya called me at work. Her voice was calm, decided. She said she'd been thinking about the guest list and realized George shouldn't come to the engagement party. "He doesn't really understand family dynamics," she said, like she was explaining a scheduling conflict. "I think it would be better if you came alone." I argued. I reminded her George had made one comment trying to help. I pointed out she'd complained about Derek herself. She didn't budge. Invitations were already going out. George could come to the wedding, she said. Just not the engagement party. It was simpler that way. When I told George that night, he shrugged. "That's okay," he said. "I get it." But then he stayed up late in his office, the one place he goes when something is really wrong, and I knew this wasn't okay. Over the next few days, Maya kept texting me like nothing had happened. Decor ideas, menu options, outfit questions. Every message made my chest tighten, because while she planned a celebration of family, my husband was quietly being edited out. And the worst part? Everyone else thought I should just let it happen. The engagement party was 3 days away when something inside me finally snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet way that changes everything. Maya called twice that week to confirm details. What time I'd arrive, what I'd wear, whether I could come early to help set up. Each time I deflected. "I'm not sure yet. I'll let you know. Things are a little busy." She didn't press. She assumed compliance. George, meanwhile, didn't mention the party at all. That silence was heavier than any argument. Instead, he made plans to visit his friend Marcus for the weekend. 3 hours away, far enough that he wouldn't be sitting at home alone, wondering why his wife was at a family celebration he wasn't allowed to attend. That detail broke my heart more than Maya's decision ever could. The night before the party, Maya stopped by our house unannounced. She wanted to borrow my good camera. She walked in like nothing had changed, hugged me, complimented the new bookshelf George had built, asked him about work, like she hadn't quietly erased him from her guest list. George was polite, distant, measured. He answered her questions briefly. No jokes, no warmth. After she left, the house felt hollow. George asked me, calmly, "Have you decided if you're going?" I said I didn't know. He told me I should go if I wanted to, that Maya was my sister, that I shouldn't miss important moments because of him. That's when I realized something terrifying. George was willing to shrink himself to keep peace, and I couldn't let that happen. The morning of the party, I called Maya. I told her I wasn't coming. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then anger. "You're choosing him over family," she said. I told her I wasn't choosing anyone. I was refusing to attend a family event where my husband wasn't welcome. She hung up on me. George was already on the road to Marcus's place when I told him what I'd done. He was quiet for a long moment, then said softly, "That means a lot to me." But I could hear the guilt in his voice. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, Maya called crying. She said she missed me, said the party went well, but it wasn't the same without me. Said she wanted to apologize and asked if we could meet for lunch. I thought maybe, finally, she understood. We met at a restaurant we used to go to when we were younger. She looked exhausted. Wedding planning had clearly taken its toll. She apologized for excluding George, said she was overwhelmed, said she'd made a bad decision. I started to relax. Then she said the words that changed everything. "The real reason," she admitted, staring into her coffee, "is that Robbie didn't want George there." I felt the air leave my lungs. She explained it casually, like it was obvious. Robbie thought George was boring, too quiet. He worried George would kill the vibe. So Maya had lied to me. She'd told me it was about family dynamics because she thought I'd accept that more easily than the truth, that she chose her fiancé's comfort over my husband's dignity. I asked if Robbie had ever said this before. She nodded. He'd complained at other gatherings. She'd defended George at first, but she was tired of having the same argument. This was easier, she said. Easier. I told her that lying to me was worse than the exclusion itself. She got defensive, said Robbie was going to be her husband, said I was overreacting, said it was just one party. I stood up and left without finishing my food. When I told George that night, he didn't get angry. He just looked sad. I always thought Robbie didn't like me, he said quietly. I just hoped I was wrong. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about one party anymore. It was about whether my husband had ever truly been welcome at all. And once that question exists, you can't unask it. After Maya told me the truth, my thoughts stopped moving in straight lines. They circled. Over and over, my mind replayed small moments I'd dismissed for years, laughs that lasted a second too long, jokes that landed a little too sharply, the way Robbie's eyes sometimes slid past George like he was furniture. I kept asking myself the same question in different forms. How long has my husband been tolerated instead of accepted? George didn't rage. He didn't demand explanations or ultimatums. That hurt in its own way. He sat at the kitchen table that night, hands folded loosely, listening while I recounted everything Maya had said. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he asked gently, "Do you think the rest of your family feels that way too?" The question hit me harder than any accusation. I told him no, immediately, too quickly. But doubt had already slipped in. Over the next few days, I watched more carefully. At my dad's birthday dinner, my uncle joked that George was the strong, silent type. My cousin nudged him and suggested another beer to loosen him up. Maya and Robbie laughed like it was harmless. George smiled politely, redirected the conversation, did what he always does. But this time I saw it differently. I saw a man managing himself to stay welcome. After dinner, Maya pulled me aside. "Are you still mad about the engagement party?" she asked, like we were discussing a minor misunderstanding. She told me she wanted me to be her maid of honor, said George would be included in wedding events. Included. I told her I needed time. She looked genuinely confused. "I already apologized," she said. "I don't understand why you're making this such a big deal." That was the moment I realized something important. Maya wasn't sorry because she understood the harm. She was sorry because the consequences were inconvenient. I tried explaining again how lying about the reason, how prioritizing Robbie's opinion over my husband's place in the family, how easily she'd erase George to avoid conflict. She listened, but impatience flickered across her face. She said maybe George was too sensitive. Maybe he needed to make more effort. Maybe Robbie had a point. Those words landed heavier than the original exclusion, because now it wasn't just about what happened. It was about who she believed needed to change. And it wasn't her. When I told George about that conversation, he didn't defend himself. He blamed himself. "I know I'm not great at small talk," he said. "I try." That broke me, because the man who had swallowed every uncomfortable moment to protect me was now wondering if he was the problem. The wedding was 4 months away. Maya kept texting, acting like things were moving forward. Dress fittings, seating charts, color palettes. I couldn't keep pretending. For the first time, I had to confront a possibility I never wanted to face. Standing up for my husband might permanently alter my relationship with my sister, and not standing up for him would alter my marriage. There was no neutral ground left. The closer Maya's wedding got, the louder the pressure became, and not from her alone. My parents called first. My mother's voice was careful, measured in that way she uses when she thinks she's being reasonable. Maya was wrong, she admitted, but she apologized. Sometimes we have to let things go to keep the family together. My father said much the same thing in his own way. He reminded me that weddings are stressful, that people say things they don't mean, that it was just one party. Just one party. I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice. I just listened and felt something settle heavily in my chest. Because what they were really asking wasn't forgiveness. They were asking me to absorb the discomfort so everyone else could stay comfortable. Meanwhile, Maya's texts grew more frequent. She sent me pictures of dresses she liked for me as maid of honor. She talked about how special it would be to have her sister standing beside her. She made plans assuming my compliance, like the conflict was already resolved. When I hesitated, she got sharper. She said I was punishing her. She said I was choosing George over family. She said I was making her wedding about myself. Robbie never reached out directly. That silence spoke volumes. When he did come up, it was through Maya. How he was stressed, how he didn't understand why this was still an issue, how he felt attacked. One night, after yet another conversation where Maya insisted I was overreacting, George suggested something that stopped me cold. "Maybe I should stay home from the wedding," he said. Not angrily, not dramatically, like he was offering to step out of the way. He said it would make things easier, that he didn't want to be the reason my relationship with my sister fell apart. That suggestion terrified me more than anything Maya had done, because it meant this situation wasn't just hurting me anymore, it was changing how George saw his place in my life. I told him no, that I wouldn't let that happen. A week before the wedding, Maya called crying. She said she couldn't handle the stress, that she needed me, that we could deal with everything later. Then she said the thing that clarified everything. She asked if I could just pretend everything was fine for the wedding weekend, so Robbie wouldn't be upset. That was it. She wasn't asking for understanding. She was asking for performance. I told her I wouldn't be her maid of honor. There was silence on the line, then anger, then disbelief. She asked if George would at least come to the wedding. I said yes, we would both attend as guests. She hesitated and said she'd need to check with Robbie about the reception. My hands started shaking. I told her calmly that if George wasn't welcome at the reception, neither of us would attend at all. She backtracked immediately, said of course George could come. She just wanted to prepare Robbie, prepare him for my husband's existence. By the time I hung up, I felt hollow. The conflict had stopped being about a single exclusion. It was now about whether my husband's presence was negotiable, and whether my sister believed my marriage deserved the same respect as hers. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather, clear sky, soft light, the kind of day people describe as beautiful without thinking twice. I felt none of that. George and I sat toward the back of the church, our shoulders just barely touching. He wore the same calm expression he always does in public, but I could feel the tension in the way his knee bounced once, then stilled. I reached for his hand. He squeezed back, steady, reassuring, like he was grounding me instead of the other way around. Maya walked down the aisle glowing. She looked happy, truly happy. And for a moment, grief washed over me. Not anger, not resentment, just grief for the sisterhood I thought we had, for the version of us that would have shared this day without fractures or conditions. The ceremony passed without incident. It was the reception that broke me. Robbie was suddenly everywhere. He stopped by our table multiple times, forcing conversation with George. Sports, work, weather, anything neutral enough to pass as friendliness. His smile was too wide. His laughter came a beat too late. Maya hovered too, introducing George loudly as her brother-in-law, pulling him into conversations like she was proving something to an invisible audience. It felt staged, performative acceptance. I watched George navigate it all with grace that bordered on self-erasure. He nodded. He laughed softly. He answered questions without taking up space. At one point, I stepped away to get some air. That's when I heard Robbie. He was talking to one of his groomsmen near the bar. I wasn't meant to hear it, but I did. I still don't get why she made such a big deal about it, Robbie said, shaking his head. George didn't even care. She's the one who caused all this. The groomsman asked what he meant. Robbie explained, casually, dismissively, that I'd refused to be maid of honor because they hadn't invited George to the engagement party. Ridiculous, he said. Ruining a wedding over one party. Something inside me went very quiet. That was the moment I understood. Nothing had changed. Not really. In Robbie's mind, and maybe in Maya's too, the problem was never the exclusion. The problem was me refusing to accept it quietly. George and I left early. In the car, the city lights blurred past again, just like after that first dinner at Maya's place. History looping back on itself. George asked if I regretted not being maid of honor. I said no, and I meant it. But when we got home, I sat alone on the edge of the bed long after he fell asleep, staring at the wall, feeling something heavy and final settle into place. This was the lowest point, not because I'd lost my sister, but because I'd finally accepted that she didn't see what she'd done as wrong. She wanted peace without accountability. And that meant there was no version of this where everything went back to how it was. The morning after the wedding, Maya called to thank me for coming. Her voice was light, relieved, like crossing the finish line after a marathon. She said she hoped we could start fresh now that the wedding stress was over. She suggested dinner, all of us, so we could move forward. Move forward. I told her I wasn't ready to pretend everything was fine. There was a pause, then a sigh, the sound of someone who believes they've already done enough. I already apologized, she said. I don't know what else you want from me. That question lingered with me long after we hung up. What did I want? I wanted understanding that wasn't conditional. I wanted accountability that didn't come with defensiveness. I wanted assurance that my husband wouldn't be treated as optional again. A week passed, then two. We didn't speak. My mother called, worried, said Maya was upset, said she missed me, said families shouldn't fracture like this. I didn't argue, because for the first time, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about choosing George over Maya. It was about refusing to teach my husband that love requires endurance of disrespect. 3 weeks after the wedding, Maya showed up at my house unannounced. George was at work. She sat across from me on the couch, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. She asked me to explain again, really explain, why the engagement party had hurt me so much. I talked, slowly, carefully. I explained how the lie hurt more than the exclusion, how knowing Robbie pushed for it made me question whether George had ever been fully welcome, how watching her hesitate again and again when asked to prioritize George's inclusion told me everything. She listened. She nodded. For a moment, I thought this might finally be it. Then she said, I think you're making assumptions about Robbie. He doesn't dislike George. He just prefers more outgoing people. There it was. The minimization, the reframing, the refusal to see impact over intent. I asked her one simple question. Can you promise me this won't happen again? That George will never be excluded from family events because he doesn't fit someone's idea of fun? She hesitated. I hope it won't come up again, she said, but I have to consider Robbie's feelings too. That hesitation was my answer. I told her I wasn't ready to go back to normal. She got frustrated, said nothing she did was enough, said she felt punished. She left upset, and I felt calm. For the first time since this all started, I wasn't confused. Clarity doesn't always feel good, but it's steady. I finally understood that Maya wasn't choosing cruelty. She was choosing convenience, and I couldn't build a relationship on that. The weeks after that conversation felt strangely quiet, like the world had moved on, but something inside me hadn't. Maya and I stopped talking. Not dramatically, no final fight, just distance. She sent short texts on birthdays, a holiday message here and there. Polite, careful, empty. My parents noticed immediately. My mother called more often, checking in, asking if Maya and I had worked things out yet. She said Maya seemed hurt and confused. She said it was sad to see sisters drift apart over something so small. Small? That word kept coming up, and every time it did, I felt myself withdraw a little more. Extended family members started weighing in too. At my grandmother's birthday party, someone mentioned how close Maya and I used to be. Another relative joked that marriage changes people. Someone else suggested I was prioritizing my husband over my family. I didn't argue, because explaining the difference between preference and principle felt exhausting. George noticed the change before I said anything. He became quieter at family gatherings, less likely to join conversations, quicker to excuse himself. He never complained, but I could see it in the way he positioned himself slightly behind me now, like he was bracing for something. One night, he said gently, "Maybe we should take a break from family events for a while." He said he didn't want to be the source of tension, that maybe stepping back would let things cool down. Part of me felt relief. The other part felt grief. Because stepping back felt like accepting the role that had been quietly assigned to him all along, optional. Maya and Robbie bought a house near my parents a month later. I heard about it secondhand. They were settling in, becoming more involved in family life, hosting dinners, planning holidays. And suddenly, I had to confront a future where my sister and her husband were at the center of family gatherings, while my own marriage hovered at the edges. I realized something painful. Some people didn't see George as family. They saw him as my husband. A distinction that shouldn't exist, but did. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. We didn't cut Maya off completely, but we stopped chasing resolution. No forced dinners, no pretend normal. Just distance. Quiet, intentional. Not as punishment. As protection. It's been 2 months since Maya's wedding. 2 months of space, of quiet, of learning how to breathe without constantly bracing for the next conversation that would ask me to explain myself again. Maya and I still aren't close. We exchange polite messages, a birthday wish, a holiday text. Nothing hostile, just distant enough to acknowledge that something fundamental has changed. My parents still hope things will go back to normal. But I've learned something important. Normal only works when everyone feels safe inside it. George and I stopped attending most family gatherings. Not out of anger, not to make a point, but because peace shouldn't require vigilance. At home, something softened between us. George talks a little more now, not because he's forcing himself to be different, but because he doesn't feel like he has to disappear to keep the peace. He no longer apologizes for being quiet. He no longer asks if he's too much or not enough. And that tells me I made the right choice. Loving someone isn't about loud declarations. It's about refusing to let them be diminished in rooms where you're supposed to belong. I still love my sister. That hasn't changed. But love without boundaries becomes permission. And boundaries don't mean you stop caring. They mean you stop betraying yourself to keep others comfortable. I've learned that standing up for your spouse doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks lonely. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like being misunderstood by people who benefit from you staying quiet. But I don't regret it. Because George deserves to be treated with respect. By my family, by my sister, by anyone who wants access to our lives. And if that means accepting a smaller circle, a quieter future, and a different version of family than the one I imagined, then so be it. Some people apologize to end conflict. Others change to prevent it. I'm building my life around the second kind.